The plate slipped from her hand, landing on the kitchen tile with a dull clatter that echoed too loudly in the silence that followed. Evelyn stood frozen, a juice-stained towel in one hand, the other clutching a soft plastic dinosaur she'd just picked up from under the table. The smell of peanut butter and overripe bananas lingered in the air. Crumbs stuck to her socks. The children had just finished lunch, their little mouths still sticky, the youngest one tugging gently on the hem of her sweater, oblivious to the storm that had just cracked through the room. Evelyn didn't blink, didn't move. She just stood. There as Lily's voice, sharp, tight, rehearsed, sliced through the space like glass. "You're the nanny, not their mother." Time didn't stop, but Evelyn did. Everything in her froze, except for the ringing in her ears and the way her chest pulled tight like a fist clenching around a secret. Her heart beat once, twice, and then seemed to forget how. Across the room, her son, Michael, looked up from his phone. His mouth parted slightly, as if to speak, to diffuse, to do something. But then he didn't. He lowered his gaze, said, "Nothing." The oldest child blinked. "Grandma?" he whispered, unsure. Lily didn't flinch. She was already turning away, smoothing her hair, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror like her words hadn't just drawn blood. Evelyn could smell her perfume, too sweet, too strong, as it trailed behind her. Her own reflection was still caught in the window glass, warped slightly by the afternoon light. She had woken at dawn to make lunches, brushed hair, found missing socks, braided ribbons, kissed cheeks, and comforted tantrums. She had read bedtime stories in a whisper while the rest of the house scrolled TikTok and sipped wine. She had kept their world spinning, quietly, faithfully, and now she was being told, in front of the children, that she was nothing more than a hired pair of hands. The words landed like a slap. Not just because of what was said, but who said it. This was the girl she had welcomed into her family with open arms, the one she had defended when Michael complained about her spending habits, the one she had baked a cake for on her first birthday, as a daughter. The one she let raise her voice, once, twice, because she told herself, she's young, she's stressed, let it go. But this was something else. Evelyn swallowed hard. The little boy at her side wrapped his arms around her leg and didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence screamed louder than anything Lily could ever say. Evelyn blinked back the heat behind her eyes and gently set the dinosaur on the counter. Something had cracked open inside her. Not anger exactly, but awareness. A final, undeniable truth had arrived. She was not loved here. She was used, and now she was discarded, labeled, dismissed. She turned slowly, stepped over the dropped plate, and walked down the hallway. Not to cry, but to think. Because the next move wouldn't be tears, it would be power. There was a time Evelyn believed love, real love, was louder than disappointment, bigger than pride, more permanent than exhaustion. She'd lived by that belief, not because anyone told her to, but because it had been stitched into her like a second skin. From the moment she held Michael in her arms, alone in that fluorescent hospital room, she knew her life wasn't hers anymore. She worked double shifts at the diner down the street, bussing tables in the morning and running the register at night. Her back ached constantly, and she wore shoes that made her feet bleed, but she never complained. Her son needed school supplies, he needed food on the table, he needed a future, and he had one because she built it brick by brick without ever asking for applause. When Michael met Lily in college, Evelyn was hopeful. She was polite, a little clipped around the edges, but Evelyn saw the way her son looked at her, that tender, eager light in his eyes. So she welcomed her, opened her arms, her wallet, her heart. When they struggled after graduation, Michael. Between jobs, Lily pregnant with their first, Evelyn did the only thing she knew how to do. She offered her home. Just until things settle, she'd said. But things never settled. They stayed. And slowly, Evelyn's world became smaller. The guest room became the baby's room. Then the hallway bathroom wasn't hers anymore. Then the living room was overtaken by toys and Lily's yoga mat and endless takeout containers Evelyn hadn't ordered. Her house became their house, and she faded into the wallpaper without even realizing it. She became a full-time caretaker without pay or title. Waking up before everyone to prepare breakfast, walking the kids to preschool, scheduling doctor's appointments, doing laundry that wasn't hers. She packed diaper bags, cleaned vomit off the carpet, and read the same bedtime stories night after night with a hoarse whisper and a tired smile. She told herself she was lucky to be close to her grandchildren, lucky to hear their little laughs echo through the halls, lucky to be needed. But as the years passed, her room became smaller, her days lonelier, her voice quieter. Holidays came and went. Mother's Day brunch was always too tight this year for anything special. Birthdays became group celebrations where she was barely an afterthought. Michael still kissed her cheek, in passing, but he never looked her in the eyes the same way. Lily stopped thanking her. She stopped asking, too, just handed the baby off with a quick, "Can you?" and disappeared into her phone. Evelyn told herself it was just the stress, that families go through rough patches, that love endures, but love, true love, doesn't demand silence. It doesn't hand you a child with one hand and shove you out of a photo with the other. It doesn't call you the nanny in your own kitchen, with your hands still warm from washing their children's dishes. Evelyn had sacrificed her life without question. She had given her home, her time, her body, her youth, everything she had, for her son's family. And now they had taken that love and stamped a price tag on it, turned it into a transaction. She wasn't family, she was labor. And that realization, that sharp, searing clarity, was the beginning of something she never thought she'd feel again. Enough. The new rules were printed and taped to the refrigerator like a chore chart, bold black letters in a sterile font. Evelyn had stared at them for a long time that morning, her hands still wet from washing out lunchboxes. The paper shimmered slightly in the fridge's low hum. At the top, childcare protocol, for clarity. Her name wasn't on it, but it was meant for her, every word. Please do not touch the children's school bags. They are organized a specific way. No communication with teachers, instructors, or school staff unless expressly asked. No deviation from pickup times. No lingering on the playground. Bring them home immediately. Evelyn's lips parted slightly, as if a word might slip out. But nothing came. Only the sound of the dripping faucet and the low murmur of cartoons from the living room. That evening, when Lily swept in wearing a power suit and perfume that could knock you back, she acted like nothing had changed. Evelyn stood by the sink, drying the last dish, and gently asked, "Did something happen at school?" Lily didn't even look at her. "We just need structure," she said, her eyes fixed on her phone. "The boys get confused when too many people are involved." Evelyn nodded, even though her throat tightened. She had been packing their bags for years. Had comforted the youngest after a tough parent-teacher meeting when Lily was too busy. She had stayed in the car during school events just in case they needed a ride home. Now she was being told she was a disruption, an interference. Days passed, and the rules hung there, a quiet insult, visible every time she reached for milk or juice boxes. The boys seemed confused, too. "Why can't you come on the field trip?" the older one asked. Evelyn smiled gently and tousled his hair. "Some things are changing, sweetheart." She didn't explain. She didn't have the words. And then, one Thursday afternoon, she came home from the grocery store and saw a silver SUV parked in the driveway. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, clipboard in hand, polo shirt with a company logo on the chest. Evelyn watched from behind her car door as the woman rang the bell and was ushered inside by Lily. They spoke with the ease of people who had already signed papers. Evelyn didn't go in right away. She sat in the car, heart pounding, groceries slowly warming in the trunk. Later that evening, when Evelyn finally asked about the woman, Lily's response was delivered without hesitation, like it was perfectly natural. "Oh, that's Kim. She's our new nanny, just part-time. We figured it was time to get professional help." She didn't say it with malice. She didn't need to. The message was loud enough. You're not professional, you're not help. You're not enough. The children didn't know what to make of it. "But Grandma's here," the younger one said that night, as Evelyn read them their usual bedtime story. "She's always here." Evelyn smiled, kissed the top of his head, and turned the page. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "I always have been." But that night, alone in her room, she sat by the edge of the bed in complete stillness. They had hired someone else, paid someone else, while she still lived in the house, still folded their laundry, still bathed their children. That wasn't just insult, it was erasure. She didn't cry, she didn't pack, she didn't confront. Not yet, she just made a note. The game had changed, and so would she. The silence had a new texture now. It wasn't the kind she'd once found comforting, the kind filled with soft bird song or the gentle shuffle of socks on hardwood floors. This silence scraped. It lingered in doorways and clung to the air like dampness. Evelyn began noticing the small things first, conversations that would halt the moment she entered the room, whispers between Michael and Lily that would drop to a hush just as she came down the stairs. Once, she walked into the kitchen and found them laughing about something on Lily's phone. They stopped mid-sentence. Lily's smile vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped nod. Michael looked at his watch like he'd just remembered he had somewhere else to be. "We're just going over some plans," he'd said, waving vaguely toward his laptop. Evelyn had nodded, as she always did, and left the room. She didn't ask what the plans were. She wasn't sure she wanted to know anymore. Then came the birthdays. The first was the youngest's, a dinosaur-themed party with rented decor and a magician. She found out about it by accident 2 days before, when she overheard one of the kids telling a friend from school. Evelyn had helped raise that child since the day he came home from the hospital, had rocked him through colic, taught him to say please and thank you, kissed every bruise he didn't want his parents to see. But there was no invitation. No, "Will you be there?" Not even a mention. On the day of the party, she stayed in her room while children shrieked in the backyard. She watched from the window, invisible behind the curtain. No one looked up. The next week, Lily began calling her when talking to the children. "Did she pack your lunch?" "Go ask her to help you with your shoes." At first, the boys resisted. "You mean Grandma?" they'd ask. But over time, the correction stopped. She became the default. Like Evelyn had been demoted to a shadow, a helper, a presence without a name. Then one morning, Evelyn woke to find her things neatly packed in boxes by the stairs. Michael had smiled sheepishly, like it was all perfectly reasonable. "We thought you might be more comfortable in the guest house, more privacy, more space. You'll have your own entrance and everything." She looked at him for a long moment, her hands resting gently on the banister. "Privacy," she repeated. What she felt was distance, disposability. But she nodded, as always. And that afternoon, she moved into the guest house behind the garage, a space that had once been used for storage, now hastily dressed with a fold-out couch and a chipped nightstand. There was no family photo, no framed crayon drawing, no sign that she belonged. The isolation settled in like winter, cold and slow. Her phone stopped ringing. The boys stopped wandering into her room at night when they had nightmares. Their routines were adjusted. Their worlds restructured. She became a footnote in the story of their lives, a pair of hands, a name not spoken. She was still the first to rise, still made oatmeal on cold mornings, still folded socks into matching pairs. but she did it in silence. Without thanks, without place. Her birthday came and went. No card, no cake, no acknowledgement, not even a text. She sat in the guest house that evening with a small candle burning in a mug of lukewarm tea and whispered the date aloud to herself, just to hear it spoken. February 10th. Her voice cracked under the weight of it. She stared at the flame until it flickered and died on its own. She wasn't angry. Not yet. That would come later. What she felt now was worse. The ache of abandonment from the very people she had built her life around. The unbearable truth of knowing you'd been replaced, without anyone thinking to tell you. It wasn't loneliness that broke her. It was being forgotten, systematically, silently, deliberately. She hadn't meant to look through the boxes that night. The rain tapped steadily against the windows of the guest house, and the power had flickered once already. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She hadn't slept well in weeks. Something about the guest house unsettled her. Maybe it was the way the walls seemed to hold the chill a little longer, or maybe it was how quiet it became at night. Too quiet, like the world had forgotten she was still in it. So she moved through the small space, pacing without purpose until her foot brushed against an old storage bin tucked behind the folding chair in the corner. She pulled it out, mostly to pass the time. A cracked plastic lid, yellowed paper labels, her handwriting. A small ache bloomed in her chest. Inside were old documents, some she hadn't seen in years. Tax records, utility receipts, Michael's high school awards she'd meant to frame. She flipped through them with slow fingers, breathing in the faint scent of dust and time. Then she saw it, a pale blue folder labeled Property and Legal. She blinked and opened it, not expecting anything of importance, just wanting to see a piece of her old life. Inside, neatly paper-clipped, was the deed to the house. Her house. She stared at the page, the legal language swirling at first. Her name stood out in bold near the top. Evelyn May Carter, sole owner. She flipped to the last page, looking for the signature that would change everything. But it wasn't there. No transfer, no date, no amendment, no record of sale or gifting. She held it up to the light and checked again. Her hands shook just slightly. The realization trickled into her like warm water through frozen veins. They had never transferred the deed. The house still belonged to her. She sat down on the edge of the guest bed, the document resting on her knees, her eyes wide and focused. She had let them move in. She had let them take over, slowly, politely, devastatingly. And she had assumed, somewhere in that quiet surrender, she had signed everything away. But she hadn't. Her name still owned every wall, every beam, every room they walked through without a thought. Heart racing, Evelyn rifled through the folder again. Behind the deed, another paper surfaced, a notarized letter from nearly 6 years ago. Michael had traveled for work then, and Lily had just given birth to their second child. Evelyn had stepped in entirely, managing the home, the kids, the appointments. On the advice of a lawyer at the time, Michael had signed a temporary guardianship agreement, naming Evelyn as the legal caretaker for the boys in case of emergency. She remembered it vaguely, something they had insisted was just a formality while he traveled. But here it was, still valid, still signed, not rescinded. She held it like a thread in her hand, a thread she hadn't realized she still carried. She sat there for a long time, listening to the storm outside settle into a steady rhythm. For the first time in months, her breathing slowed, not because the pain had left her, but because something else had returned. Possibility. The next day, she made a quiet call. Not to her son, not to anyone in the family. She dialed the number of an old friend, Thomas, a retired lawyer who had once lived 2 doors down from her before his wife passed. They hadn't spoken in a few years, but when he picked up, his voice was the same warm gravel she remembered. "Evelyn," he said, with a softness that made her want to cry. "It's been too long." She told him everything. He listened in silence, no interruptions, just the occasional soft sigh on the other end of the line. When she finished, there was a pause. Then he said gently, "Evie, you have more power than you think." She exhaled slowly. "But I didn't want power," she whispered. "I just wanted peace." "You might get both," he replied. "And frankly, it's about damn time." She didn't smile. Not yet. It was too soon for that. The ache in her chest hadn't disappeared, but something had shifted. She wasn't breathless anymore. She wasn't drowning. She was beginning to remember who she had been before they asked her to forget. And for the first time in too long, Evelyn folded the documents neatly, slid them into a new folder, and placed it gently on the nightstand beside her bed. Not buried in a box, not pushed out of sight. They were hers, her name, her right. And she would decide what happened next. Evelyn moved like a tide turning, slow, steady, and impossible to stop. She didn't tell anyone she was going out that week. She simply started rising a little earlier, dressing a little sharper, choosing her words more carefully. On Monday, she left the house before dawn, riding the early bus downtown with a folder tucked securely in her bag. Her meeting with Thomas was brief but powerful. He greeted her with that same warm, knowing smile and offered her tea before they got to work. They reviewed the deed, the guardianship papers, and then began drafting a letter, not one filled with fire, but one lined with steel. Direct, calm, legal, irrefutable. It was addressed not to Michael or Lily, but to the family attorney listed in a past trust Evelyn had once helped pay for. The letter was a formality, yes, but it was also a warning. Evelyn Carter had not disappeared, and she was not to be dismissed. On Tuesday, she filed the necessary motions, discreetly, through Thomas's office, to reaffirm the guardianship rights that were still, legally, hers. Just enough to remind the court and the family that she had been entrusted once, and trust didn't vanish just because someone else forgot. By Wednesday, she had updated her will. She removed Michael's name, replacing it with organizations she had long admired: a women's shelter, a literacy program, a community legal aid group. She even added a handwritten note at the end. One Thomas encouraged her to include, "Love is not ownership. Family is not entitlement." Her assets, modest though they were, would no longer be passed to those who saw her as a burden. They would go to those who understood value, not just in money, but in humanity. And still, she said nothing. She made their coffee every morning. She packed the boys' lunches. She nodded quietly as Lily rattled off instructions and Michael pretended not to see her in the hallway. The rules still hung on the refrigerator, curling slightly at the corners. Evelyn glanced at them now and then with a small, unreadable expression. She didn't break the rules. She didn't argue with them. She followed them with almost surgical precision, never touching the boys' bags, never speaking to a teacher, never lingering. But she was watching, measuring, waiting. She knew now that power didn't come from yelling or slamming doors. It came from knowing the truth and holding it, quietly, until the moment was right. Like holding a match in a room soaked in gasoline, one small spark when you're ready. The house continued its rhythm. Lily complained about traffic. Michael came home late. The boys were shuffled from one obligation to another. No one suspected. No one saw her coming. Because they had stopped seeing her at all, and that was their mistake. Because Evelyn didn't need to raise her voice to win. She only needed to remember who she was and act accordingly. It came without warning, to them at least. But Evelyn had known the exact hour it would land. She had marked the date in her planner, right between a grocery list and a reminder to prune the basil. On Friday morning, while Lily was at the salon and Michael was rushing to make a meeting downtown, a courier knocked on their front door. A clean brown envelope was handed over with a polite nod. Inside, a formal eviction notice, signed and sealed by the county court. Accompanying it was a certified letter stating that all legal rights to the property had reverted to Evelyn May Carter, sole and undisputed owner. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a final decision backed by documents, signatures, and undeniable truth. Lily's shriek echoed through the halls first. Then came Michael's voice, louder, more panicked. They tore through the living room looking for Evelyn, but she was not in the house. She was standing on the porch of the guest house, hands calmly folded, watching birds gather around the feeder she had just refilled. When Michael stormed toward her, paper in hand, his face flushed, Evelyn said nothing. She simply looked at him and then turned to go back inside, her door clicking shut with the sound of completion. That same day, a call came from the boys' school. The youngest had gotten into a small fight, pushing a classmate who had teased him about being picked up by the babysitter again. The school contacted the emergency guardian listed on file. Not Lily, not Michael, Evelyn. They called her. She arrived 15 minutes later, quiet, composed, and with a warmth the child collapsed into the moment he saw her. The school counselor, after reviewing the guardianship papers, approved the temporary custody shift for the weekend while the incident was investigated. That evening, Evelyn cooked dinner with the boys in the guest house kitchen. They laughed. They spilled flour. They talked about dinosaurs and space travel and what it meant to be brave. Across the yard, lights turned off in the main house one by one, but Evelyn didn't look over once. By Saturday, the county assessor's website had updated. A quiet click from a stranger's computer would now confirm what Evelyn had always known in her bones. The house was hers. Her name glowed at the top of the page like justice finally spoken aloud. No hidden transfer, no legal loopholes. She hadn't taken it back in fury. She had simply reminded the system of what had always been true. The calls came in flurries, emails, messages, Lily crying, Michael pleading. But it was too late for panic to matter. The papers had been signed. The house was hers. The boys were safe, wrapped in the arms that had raised them. And the silence she held now was not the silence of a woman pushed aside. It was the silence of power, calm, legal, and irreversible. The phone began ringing early each morning, sometimes before the sun had fully risen. At first, it was Michael. His name blinking across the screen like a ghost she no longer feared. Mom, please, can we talk? His voice was rough in the first voicemail. Regret laced the edges, but it was the regret of consequence, not reflection. He called again at noon, then again at night. His messages grew longer, more desperate. I didn't know they were serving you eviction papers. I didn't realize what Lily was doing. You should have told me. You should have. But Evelyn didn't owe him that anymore. She had told him in 1,000 quiet ways. He simply hadn't listened. Then came Lily. Her tone was a performance, polished, pleasant, almost sweet. Evelyn, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Things were never supposed to get this extreme. The kids miss you. I miss our talks. Evelyn nearly laughed at that one. Talks? Lily had once gone a full month without acknowledging her presence, beyond texted instructions. Now she wanted warmth? Now she remembered Evelyn's name? Some days Evelyn would simply let the calls ring out. Other days she would hold the phone in her hand, thumb hovering over the green button, just to feel the weight of what it meant to not press it, to choose silence. Her fingers never moved. She didn't block them. She let the messages stack, one after the other, like pebbles on a grave. The hardest calls came at night. Small voices, the boys. Grandma, are you there? Can we come back soon? The youngest whispered, I miss your pancakes. Evelyn closed her eyes and placed the phone face down on the table. Her heart ached, deep and maternal, but her hands didn't reach. Because she knew now what had to come first. Peace. Not the kind built on walking on eggshells or shrinking into corners, but real peace. The kind that said, I exist and I matter, even when you choose not to see me. She still made their favorite meals sometimes, just in case. She still folded the tiny t-shirts left behind when they had been rushed out of the house in protest. But she didn't reach out, because they needed to know the cost of erasure, the weight of forgetting. The house was calm now. She walked barefoot across its floors. She opened the windows when she pleased. She listened to records in the living room at full volume. And sometimes, in the quiet between songs, she would look at her phone, blinking again with another call, and she would breathe. Not with bitterness, not with cruelty, but with clarity. She didn't hang up on them. She simply didn't answer. Because some silences aren't empty. They are earned. And in hers, Evelyn found a strength that was fuller, sharper, more regal than any apology could ever offer. She wore her peace like a crown. And she wasn't taking it off. The morning light spilled across the garden like honey, soft and golden, touching everything it met with warmth. Evelyn walked slowly down the stone path, one grandchild on each side, their small hands wrapped around her fingers, swinging gently with every step. The elder one pointed out a butterfly perched on the rosemary bush. The younger tried to name each flower with his own made-up words. She didn't correct them. She just listened, smiling, her heart full in a way she hadn't felt in years. The roses had bloomed early this spring. So had she. The house behind them glowed with life. Real life, not the rushed, brittle energy of people moving too fast to notice each other, but the steady, humming peace of a home tended with love. She had opened every window that morning. The breeze carried in the scent of the earth, of cinnamon from the bread she had baked, just because she wanted to. No one had told her what to cook. No one had scolded her for spoiling them. She made pancakes on weekdays now, just because the boys asked, and they asked for Grandma's pancakes, not the Nanny's. That word hadn't been spoken in weeks. It had been buried beneath bedtime stories, garden games, and whispered giggles during movie nights. She watched the boys chase each other beneath the lemon tree, their laughter loud and full, and something deep inside her softened. Not because they needed her, they always had, but because now she knew her worth wasn't tied to how much she did. It was who she was. Grandma, not as a function, but as a presence, a person, a joy. Later, as they sat on the porch eating slices of fruit and listening to a jazz record Evelyn loved, the older one leaned against her shoulder and said, "I'm glad you live here, Grandma. It feels good when you're in the house." Evelyn didn't cry, but she felt the tears brush behind her eyes like a wave smoothing the shore. She kissed the top of his head, brushed crumbs from his cheek, and simply whispered, "Me too." For so long she had thought her value was conditional, a quiet exchange for usefulness. That once her hands weren't full of chores, she'd be dismissed, forgotten. But now she knew the truth. She wasn't the burden. She was the foundation. The reason that house had ever felt like a home. And maybe the world had forgotten that for a while. Maybe she had too. But not anymore. Now she woke each day not out of obligation, but choice. She cooked when she wanted, walked in the garden when the mood struck, danced with the boys in the kitchen without glancing at the clock. The house echoed with warmth again, not because others gave it to her, but because she poured it in herself. She had always been loved, but more importantly, now she loved herself. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Upstairs, the boys slept soundly, their soft breaths rising and falling in the rhythm of peace. Toys were tucked away, storybooks closed, nightlights casting gentle glows in corners Evelyn had once cleaned in silence. Now they were filled with life again. And downstairs, in the kitchen that had once felt like a stage she wasn't allowed on, she stood at the head of the table, slicing herself a thick piece of cake, not for anyone else, just for her. A small candle flickered beside her plate, not for a birthday, not for a holiday, simply because she wanted light. She didn't rush. She didn't glance at the clock. She didn't wait to be invited to sit. She took her seat. The cake was warm, still fragrant from the oven. She ate slowly, fork tapping gently against the china, savoring every bite. The table was hers. The house was hers. The silence was hers. Not heavy, not cold, but calm. Earned. She looked out the window, past the garden, into the night sky. This time, she ate at her table. Alone and free.